I have a lot of thoughts for this Chainsaw Man chapter. I enjoyed it. I think it was interesting. I think it shows Denji, Asa, and War in a very peculiar light. After the horrific event that just happened, a lot of people were banking on this massive revelation or wanted to see something extravagant come from all of this, right? But in typical Fujimoto fashion, we're just back to the norm. Just an everyday trip. We're back on the train. We're back going to get food. We're heading towards sushi. It's normal. And it is that discomfort within the normal which feels eerie. I mean, just look at Denji's reaction throughout this whole chapter. How is he meant to feel? What is going through his mind? How is his emotions? But also, how is Asa? She's confused. She doesn't know what's going on. She thinks she's going to be perceived a certain type of way. There's all of this conflict internally because of the confusion, because you don't really know as a reader in what way he would interpret or take the situation that just happened. It really leaves you in a position of unknown. And Fujimoto loves to do this. He loves to throw out these big curveballs and these massive events and then just throw you back into like an everyday life. The normalcy. Again, it's eerie. It's problematic. We don't want to jump, skip, and hop over what Denji just went through. And we also, importantly, don't want to jump, hop, or skip over what Asa went through. This has all been propelled through by War, and this is War's interpretation. It's not as simple as just action or motives that War is doing, but feeling. So what I mentioned in the previous video is that I thought that Asa and War were merging together, and that still hasn't been technically confirmed, but we're now seeing more of the feelings taking a priority. These feelings are so strong that they can be persuasive, basically infecting the body that is War, and that feeling of Asa becoming one with War. So it's hard for us as readers to realistically tell the difference. I still think the way Fujimoto approached the previous chapter was very intentional, showing the scars and the horseman eyes on Asa's face when she returned to the body and not vice versa, showing that the two are becoming more and more intertwined with each other's feelings and potentially over time become one. Do they merge together and just become one in total? It's probably a little bit too far, but the idea is still there. At least feeling wise, it makes perfect sense, and it's showing more and more of the repercussions for it. And just because this is a strong desire and feeling for Asa propelling itself through War doesn't mean that's Asa's actions. It's War's interpretation, and that should be very clear. Until you find out what Asa is feeling, what her intention was, and what she thought about the situation, which you only get a snippet of, you only know a part of the story, and she did not want this. Also really love the way that she reflects it towards Denji. Kind of still takes into consideration Denji's feelings a little bit while still thinking about herself, and this is something common that Asa does when she's being viewed in a weird way. She does not want to be viewed as a quote-unquote person of the night, someone that sleeps around. The S word for YouTube safety. That's to be expected, and just off those words alone you can infer that she'd wanted no part of this. She did not want to do this, so War's interpretation of those feelings was very much wrong. This is kind of vital in my opinion to understand, because the more War and Asa kind of go through this situation, especially from here on out, the complexity of that emotion, the detail, the specifics is what is important. It is vital to understanding that character's actions. It's only going to get more difficult from here, more confusing, more weird. Will they ever understand each other? Will they ever have a commonality between the two, bridging the emotional distinction? Probably not, but it all depends on how they come together and how they see eye to eye. Do they completely separate as beings, so they're two different entities, or do they start to become closer and closer and kind of blur that line more and more? I need to preface the importance of the perspective that Denji has, because who he is seeing right now in front of him, we know is War, but to him is Asa, and the way that War is currently speaking is very different to what he normally hears. The big problem about this is the way that War acts does not match or align with the feelings, nor does it align with her words. So you have three different kind of pockets of things or perspectives that's going on, and all of them are very loosely attached. Basically, Asa's feelings aren't getting through to War. The ones that do, War misinterprets, and the actions don't don't even represent that. But then the way that War talks doesn't even reflect the actions or the emotions. So those three stages are so incredibly difficult for Denji to even digest. And this is only from the War perspective. When you take into consideration Asa as a person, when she's talking to Denji, entirely different situation. This is a lot more difficult to deal with than I think a lot of people realize. The conclusion that I'm coming to is that Denji does not know how to handle this. He is so back and forth. He's being pulled in all different directions and really has no understanding on the person that's standing in front of him. He thinks he might, but even only a handful of chapters ago, you could see that confusion, questioning on why Asa and War were so flippant, changing how they talk to him, changing how they care. He sees that something is different. So it doesn't help that War here and her actions are so difficult to understand. She's still feeling the repercussions of Asa's emotions. Those inflictions are still very strong, and those urges are still being acted upon. She kisses Denji again. Her words don't follow up those actions. They actually make it more confusing. Talking about the other me likes you. Her feelings flowed into me. But prior to this, the typical War aggressive nature was present. Now, I don't want to think it, but I'm going to put the idea out there. There could be a really bad conclusion to this, and that the person that Denji actually is smitten by, that he falls in love with, is War. And it's just because of the toxic jump between aggression and love. And that path can be oddly addicting, which is incredibly toxic and abusive for someone that hasn't experienced the genuineness of love. So if Asa is genuine, and we know that she is, and War is kind of the toxic wielder of it, Denji is the one constantly getting abused without him realistically realizing. And it's because it's jumping back and forth, those two patterns, from genuineness to aggression. I want to say the biggest design aspect of this chapter that I really love, and it could just be me overthinking it entirely, but I don't know with Fujimoto, he tends to be pretty specific on how he showcases things. The entirety of this chapter and all the situation that happened in the prior was shrouded in darkness, and it takes place in an alleyway. Now, what's important about the alleyway motif is that this is usually a representation of the cluttered mind and emotional complexity of Denji's being. You see him here as a child, you see him here at his most vulnerable, you see him here getting ripped apart by Makima mentally and emotionally. There's so many things that go into this motif of a cluttered alleyway. It's meant to feel closed off and suffocating. Even his door, the representation of his sealed away trauma, is actually within a dark alleyway. Tell me why that the lighting for this chapter slowly kind of reveals Denji in a brighter sense. And mind you, this is kind of the first time it's been depicted like this, at least this way. Again, I could be overthinking it, but it seems very intentional. This is not something that you accidentally do, and you can see it throughout this chapter evolving and slowly, gradually covering Denji's whole body as a creative design philosophy. The final panel for this idea is Denji within this alleyway, backed by darkness, but sitting in a lighted, vibrant area. This makes me question things. Either this is incredibly problematic and alleyway being housed as a representation is no longer needed because Denji has either made his choice or stepped away from it and evolved into something else entirely, or this is technically a relief thing where he can walk out of the alleyway, has finally been given a sense of comfort or a sense of understanding that he's never gotten before. It depends. See, there's no real good that comes from any of these actions that just happen. It's all manipulative. It's all filtered through War and then filtered also through Denji's experience with people. Mind you, this is the exact way that Makima manipulated him in the first place, and he told himself that he would never go back to that, and I don't think he will. So maybe that is the challenge that he's currently facing in trying to understand what War in Asa truly means to him, because there is genuine feeling. We know that. And we know Asa has genuine feeling. I mean, just see her reaction after this with War walking out of the darkness, and as soon as she hits the light, that is when Asa comes back into the story. So it could just be a simple representation of these two beings being very holy in a sense, very innocent, and that's what their love should be, genuine and innocent. And then the darkness that is muddling all of that and manipulating it, abusing it, is none other than War. I do love the confrontation War and Asa Asa have? Because she doesn't hold back. She's fighting herself and beating War up, and you can see War kind of confused but trying to defend herself and just everything in between, acting like someone that thinks they know what they're doing, that thinks they know it all, but realistically missed the mark entirely. It's kind of a quirky way to show War, especially jumping away from that seriousness that she usually has. Asa is not happy about this, but it's just the surface of what she's truly feeling, and I do hope later on that we get a deeper exploration of this in some way, shape or form. The very last thing has me nervous. They finally get to their sushi bar location. It's called Death by Sushi, so pretty ominous, I guess. The problem that I have with this, Death by Sushi, is not actually the name itself, even though that's the implication that it gives off, that maybe death could spawn here or something could happen in relation to the final arc or death itself. You get it. My issue is how the building's portrayed, and you're probably thinking, what does that even mean? I'm gonna go out on a limb and just say that this building, this panel itself, reminds me exactly of the time that Darkness Devil spawned into the world. Even though Death by Sushi is pretty straightforward, potentially saying that death is coming, I think even just the design choice and the philosophy of that image makes me believe that a hand's gonna come cascading out of the sky. I could be completely wrong, and I kind of hope that I am, because the idea of them just awkwardly sitting there and eating sushi is kind of a funny situation for me. But something will definitely happen. If it's not death, maybe a product of death, maybe death sent someone. If there was ever a fight to happen or to take place, this would be a great place to start, and with the label of Death by Sushi, it's probably building up to that point. Whether something comes out of the sky or not, I don't know, but I would love to see it. I'll put the idea out there. Maybe it's funny that they sit in there, they start eating sushi, and death is just on the other side of the counter, cooking it, maybe sitting at the other side of the table. I don't know. Simplistic approach that Fujimoto could take would be very fascinating to me, so I'm excited. I'm interested to see, and I'm curious to hear all of your thoughts. It's probably not the chapter that you were expecting, but nonetheless, still very insightful. You just have to dig apart as much as you can.